Have you ever wondered how our communities grow? Why some economies specialize in certain things? Or why some countries, places, or regions have significant business activity while other places struggle? These are complex questions that are constantly being discussed and debated. Many economists will agree that economies that establish a solid foundation and efficiently facilitate investments that enable the adoption and advancement of innovations grow faster, grow more sustainably, and prove to be more resilient than economies that do not. So, what is the appropriate framework that allows an economy to go from this to this? Well, let's imagine that building a sustainable economy is like developing an algorithm, or building a puzzle, or even following a recipe. A recipe with two main parts. The first part of the recipe begins with examining how to build a competitive investment climate. And the first ingredient we need has to do with a place's advantages, the comparative advantage ingredient. Even if it is difficult to identify right away, every place has at least one comparative advantage. Some areas are good locations for commercial or residential development because of their closeness to markets. Others might be well suited for tourism. Some places may have resources or resource rights, and some may have many people with unique skills or talents. Some are well positioned to invest in clean energy and carbon emissions reduction. Some have good access to capital, research, innovations, or emerging technologies. And some places may have more than one of these advantages. What would Singapore be without its port? Or Silicon Valley without a technology cluster? Or Whistler without its snow-covered peaks? Now, what about the second part of the recipe? While it is important to understand an economy's advantage, the first ingredient, the presence of this ingredient alone does not necessarily result in a strong and prosperous economy. Take, for example, the economies of places like Russia or Peru, two countries well endowed with natural resources and, in the case of Russia, technology and human resources. However, neither country provides a high standard of living because they have been unable to develop supportive institutions to facilitate investment and generate economic growth. Just like a house needs a foundation, an economy needs institutions to stand on its own and function properly. What are the key ingredients or institutions that enable economies to prosper? Economies grow because of trade and investment. Both trade and investment happen faster with clear rules about property rights and efficient land title registry systems. Without them, all business takes longer and investment and trade move elsewhere. Laws can slow or increase the speed of trade and investment. They can reduce or increase the certainty of contracts. A legal framework that supports economic efficiencies is essential for a competitive investment climate. Next, how do we ensure the government and its administration will implement the legal framework and property rights in a manner that supports economic growth? Economies need responsive and reliable governance, leadership, and administration so they can move at the speed of business. Good laws, clear property rights, and efficient governments create lower costs to get investment and trade deals completed. But what about the costs of providing public services and infrastructure at a fair price? Economies are not sustainable without good public services like health, education, transportation, and water, to name a few. The relationship between public service costs and revenues is called the fiscal relationship. Economies need efficient fiscal relationships that have adequate local fiscal powers and transfer certainty from other governments so that investors have confidence in current and future costs and taxes. And finally, economies need economic or business-grade infrastructure to facilitate investment, support economic activity, and improve health and other important services in a community. This infrastructure must be able to expand with the economy. It must also be built efficiently and at the best possible public borrowing terms. When these public institutional elements are in place, they allow an economy's comparative advantage to be converted to a competitive one. Almost all economies have some comparative advantages. But without a public sector framework to support these advantages, they are often left underdeveloped. The challenge for most Indigenous communities is not a lack of innovative citizens, entrepreneurs, or economic and business opportunities. All Indigenous communities have comparative advantages. The problem for many Indigenous communities is that colonization destroyed their public sector institutions by taking away their title, fiscal power, and jurisdiction. The result is that Indigenous communities don't have competitive economies. They don't have all the public sector ingredients. As such, the imaginations and economic potential of their citizens and entrepreneurs are constrained by how long it takes to move from ideas to business. The research and curriculum of the Tulo Center focuses on how to build the institutional requirements for competitive First Nation and Indigenous economies. Our program is intended to provide public sector entrepreneurs who are interested in building competitive and sustainable economies the tools to renew your institutions so your economies and revenues grow, which means accessing and establishing the missing public sector ingredients to complete the economic recipe. As stated by our founder, Manny Jules, we have to replace the colonial structures and renew our governments and economies by creative destruction. Our economic growth is our best weapon to achieve this.